I thought it was a misunderstanding when they said he's a black belt world champion. He's been training 3 years. I remember thinking even in 2000 when I first started, I can't be hearing that right. That's got to be impossible. You don't get a black belt in 3 years. You don't get a purple belt in 3 years most of the time. The idea that he is a black belt world champion training 3 years made no logical sense to me.
But looking back someday, it's going to hit me hard. Like, damn, I actually pulled all that off. But right now, I'm caught right in the thick of it. Can't really see the full picture when you're living it, you know? BJ Penn had it all at one point. This incredible raw gift, serious money, a pair of UFC belts around his waist. Then he watched it all slip away. Not because of one devastating loss inside that cage, but through a series of choices that started way before any brain damage kicked in. And those same patterns, they're still playing out today. The gifted fighter and the troubled man.
He was a guy who got put in jiu-jitsu because his dad was just looking for a way to keep him out of trouble. He was starting fights on the street constantly. Every day, the guy would just hop off his bike and start a fight for no reason. And his parents put him in something that they thought would help him.
If you want to grasp the real tragedy of what happened to BJ Penn, you've got to get what made him so special, to begin with. That same thing that made him extraordinary, it's exactly what made him a danger to everyone around him, including himself.
Because remember, you carry the name of the gym with you wherever you go. That reputation follows the gym as well. That's why he won a world title with Novignon, but didn't train in MMA with Novignon, from what I heard. But this idea that he was constantly causing an issue everywhere he went, this doesn't go away.
Penn managed something incredible. He earned that black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in just 3 years and 4 months. Think about that for a second. He became the first person from outside Brazil to capture the world championship at black belt level. When people called him the Prodigy, that wasn't some marketing gimmick. That was just stating facts. J.D. Penn came into this world December 13th, 1978, in Kailua, Hawaii. His family had serious wealth. Lorraine Shin, his mother, built a successful business empire. The family controlled major property across the island. Penn never needed to step into a ring to pay his bills. He never had to do anything to survive, really. But there he was, fighting anyway.
When he gets out of his weight class, when he fights guys, once again, Lyoto Machida, he loses by decision to a prime Lyoto Machida, who, if you guys don't remember, is a 205-pounder then. All right, a big dude, and BJ Penn is a 55er.
Here's the detail that flips the entire story on its head. Penn didn't stumble into martial arts because he loved competition. His parents basically forced him into it, hoping it might stop their son from randomly attacking people on the street. When Penn turned 17, his neighbor Tom Callos introduced him to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Callos showed Penn and his brothers everything he could teach them. Penn packed up and moved to San Jose, California to train at Ralph Gracie's academy. He climbed his way up to purple belt under Gracie, but that wasn't enough. Penn traveled all the way to Nova União in Brazil to complete his journey to black belt. He conquered that world championship, but even while representing one of the planet's most respected gyms, he kept getting into street fights and creating chaos. Nova União apparently got fed up with him dragging their reputation through the mud.
I had heard a million stories about BJ Penn coming to the gym an hour late, smoking everybody, and then leaving a half hour early. I heard 10 different versions of that story when I was coming up. That the dude was just uber talented, but didn't like putting in the work. But when he was firing on all cylinders and taking it seriously, there was no one better.
This is where you find the real thread running through everything. Penn was causing problems long before he ever took a professional punch. Before the UFC existed in his world, before he ever stepped into a cage, before any brain trauma from competition could possibly be blamed. Those street fights, that lack of control, all that trouble, it was already baked into who he was. But his talent was so completely overwhelming that none of the warning signs seemed to matter, at least not yet. Penn stepped into the octagon for the first time May 24th, 2000. He displayed striking skills that nobody saw coming from someone known purely for groundwork. 3 years later, he jumped up to welterweight to challenge Matt Hughes for his belt at UFC 46. Everyone expected Hughes to handle him, but Penn choked him out in the first round with a rear naked choke. That victory handed him the UFC welterweight championship. People still talk about that fight as one of the most shocking upsets MMA has ever seen, Penn became just the second fighter in UFC history to hold championships in 2 different divisions. He headlined 11 main events for the organization. Freddie Roach, the legendary boxing trainer, called Penn the best boxer in all of mixed martial arts. Even Dana White saw what everyone else was seeing. If you actually count up how many times BJ Penn showed up in phenomenal shape during his career, White said once, "I love the guy." BJ's been a massive star for us for years, but I think he could have been in conversations about who's the greatest fighter who ever lived. His talent was never the issue. Everything else surrounding it, that was the problem. The burden of always reaching high. One of the most confusing things about BJ Penn's entire career was this relentless drive to fight men who were simply bigger than him. It showed incredible courage and fearlessness, but it might have also been a form of protecting his own ego while slowly destroying what he'd built.
And then he stopped working with Marvin Rinovich right before Frankie Edgar, and that was part of the reason he didn't physically look the same against Frankie Edgar.
Penn's natural home was at lightweight. At 55 pounds, when he was fully committed and properly prepared, he was basically unstoppable. During that incredible run from the Jens Pulver days through Joe Stevenson, Sean Shirk, Kenny Florian, and Diego Sanchez, he looked like the most dangerous man on the planet. But Penn could never just settle into that dominance. After taking that welterweight belt from Matt Hughes, he gave it up to chase bigger money in Japan with K1. He took on Lyoto Machida, who would later become the light heavyweight champion, and walked around at over 220 pounds. Penn was giving up close to 70 pounds. This mindset reveals everything. By choosing to fight these giants, Penn always had the size difference to point to if things went wrong. He never had to fully commit to being the absolute best at 55 pounds and then face the consequences of losing with no excuses available. After capturing that UFC welterweight title, Penn spent 2 full years fighting randomly across Japan and Hawaii, competing way above his natural weight. He fought at catch weights, he fought at welterweight. Reports say he even stepped up to heavyweight against opponents who dwarfed him. When Penn finally came back to 55 pounds with complete focus, he was absolutely devastating. Those victories over Joe Stevenson and Sean Shirk were pure artistry. He defended his title against former champion Sean Shirk at UFC 84, winning by TKO at the end of the 3rd round. Against Kenny Florian, he locked in a rear naked choke at 3:45 of the 4th round to successfully defend his lightweight championship. But that call from welterweight kept pulling him back. Georges St-Pierre held that belt, and Penn wanted it back, so up he went again. He challenged GSP for the welterweight title, January 31st, 2009, at UFC 94. The first round stayed close, but St-Pierre controlled everything that followed. After the 4th round, Penn's corner threw in the towel. Penn got systematically broken down by a bigger, stronger, more prepared athlete. The pattern couldn't be ignored anymore. At lightweight, with full commitment, Penn could dominate anybody. At welterweight, against the elite level, his talent alone wasn't going to be enough. He needed the conditioning, the preparation, the total commitment, and those were exactly the things he kept struggling to provide. 5 out of the 7 men who beat BJ Penn were welterweight. His losses to Machida, GSP, Nick Diaz, Rory McDonald, and Matt Hughes in their rematch all came against bigger opponents. When he stayed at 155, he was nearly impossible to beat. When he wandered into those deeper waters of welterweight, he kept getting overweight. Think about the simple math of fighting across weight classes. A lightweight typically walks around at 170 to 75 pounds and cuts down to 50. A welterweight walks around at 125 to 190 and cuts to 170. When Penn fought Georges St-Pierre, he was giving up 15 to 20 pounds of pure muscle. When he fought Lyoto Machida at that catchweight, the difference was even more extreme. Machida was a natural light heavyweight, a man who would later hold that division's championship, competing at 205 pounds. Penn's willingness to take these fights showed his fearlessness. It also showed something more disturbing, an unwillingness to commit to being the absolute best in the one-weight class where he'd already proven he could dominate. That psychological safety net was always there waiting for him. Size could always take the blame. The saddest part is everyone could see it happening. Penn only managed 3 successful title defenses at lightweight. With his level of talent, it should have been 10. It should have been a dynasty that lasted years. Instead, he kept leaving to chase glory in weight classes where the physics worked against him from the start. The commitment problem. Beyond all that weight class wandering, there was another issue that followed Penn throughout his career. His legendary refusal to fully commit to training.
you can't take away from the guy's talent, but you can certainly take away from his psychological instability. You can certainly blame him for that. That's always been around. No matter how good he was, there were always these problems with his work ethic. There were always problems with him getting in trouble on the street.
Stories spread throughout the MMA community for years about how Penn would show up late, completely dominate everyone in the gym with minimal effort, then leave before anyone else was done. His natural abilities were so extraordinary that he could coast on pure talent alone, at least for a while. The idea of motivated BJ Penn became this running joke and excuse throughout the MMA world. The theory was that all of Penn's losses could be explained by his lack of interest in actually preparing to fight, and somehow this wasn't considered completely unacceptable. When Penn was motivated, he couldn't be stopped. When he wasn't, he lost. The problem was that motivated BJ Penn only showed up sometimes. The solution appeared in 2009 when Penn started working with Marv Marinovich. Marv was one of the NFL's first strength and conditioning coaches, the creator of the NFL Combine format, and a pioneer in combining strength training with flexibility work. He was also, famously, the father of Todd Marinovich, that test tube quarterback whose entire childhood had been engineered by his father from birth. Under the guidance of the Marinovich family, Penn prepared for back-to-back lightweight title defenses against Kenny Florian and Diego Sanchez. Those might have been the two most impressive victories of his entire career. He went the full distance against elite competition without fading even slightly. He looked like a completely different fighter. Marv Marinovich said later, "I think BJ realized that his typical traditional training wasn't getting the job done. When we worked with BJ, it's almost been 6 years now. BJ had great success, so he decided to call us. But the partnership ended suddenly."
And it's just as your career fades and the screen that people used to look at, which was the talent and the ability and the performance in the ring, that all goes away. And all that's left is kind of the psychological illness you're left with.
The reasons for the split have never been fully explained publicly. What we do know is that Penn went back to training in Hawaii with his longtime crew, people who knew him, respected him, and maybe were less likely to push him past his comfort zone. The Marinoviches demanded brutal commitment. They showed up at the gym before 9 a.m. every single day, putting Penn through 2-hour sessions of cone drills, box jumps, and unconventional exercises. They came back in the evening for 90-minute sessions of speed and strength work, including sprint sets that lasted 25 solid minutes, the exact length of a 5-round UFC fight. That level of discipline was exactly what Penn needed. It wasn't what he wanted. The two sides split up right in the middle of training camp for Penn's first fight with Frankie Edgar. Penn went on to lose a controversial decision and the UFC lightweight title. Many people believed Penn had actually won that fight, but his conditioning was visibly worse than it had been against Florian and Sanchez. Dana White commented during the post-fight press conference that he was proud of Penn's willingness to take MMA training more seriously. Earlier, he felt Penn had coasted through the UFC on natural talent alone, but by then the partnership that had unlocked Penn's full potential was already finished. The rematch with Edgar was decisive. Edgar neutralized Penn's ground game and controlled the fight with sharp movement and crisp striking combinations. All three judges scored at 50-45 for Edgar. Many fans felt that under the Marinovich's guidance, Penn had never been in better fighting condition. The Florian and Sanchez victories proved what a properly conditioned Penn could accomplish. But instead of continuing with what was clearly working, Penn went back to training with his friends in Hawaii, people who wouldn't push him the way the Marinoviches had.
And that's what disappointed me so much when he made a run for governor. And I saw grapplers that I know supporting this guy's candidacy. And I'm going, this guy's never made a sound decision in his life. And you want him in charge of an entire state because you like the way he grapples or you like the way he fights? That's insane.
When someone asked Joe Rogan about the greatest fighter of all time, he said, "Penn's had plenty of fights where he didn't come out looking great, but he's also one of the only guys who would jump up 1, 2, or 3 weight classes and bounce around doing all kinds of crazy stuff." I think that's super impressive. I think it's BJ. Even Anderson Silva called Penn the greatest of all time. Penn is the best MMA fighter I've ever seen fight in my entire life. The respect from other fighters was universal, but respect alone doesn't create a legacy. Wins do, and Penn's inability to consistently prepare properly robbed him of the wins that would have cemented his place at the very top. The long fall. After that second Edgar loss, Penn's career entered a phase that was genuinely painful to witness. He kept fighting way past his prime, taking beatings from opponents who wouldn't have been in the same conversation during his best years. Penn's final record sits at 16 wins for someone considered among the greatest lightweights ever. That record tells the story of a career that went on far too long. He fought John Fitch at welterweight. He fought Rory MacDonald. He fought Nick Diaz. Every time he was smaller, less conditioned, and less prepared. Every time he lost. In 2019, Penn got involved in a bar fight that led to his release from the UFC. Dana White publicly stated that Penn would never fight for the organization again. The pattern from his youth had come full circle. Those street fights that originally got him placed in martial arts were happening again. Only now he was in his 40s with years of accumulated damage. These incidents weren't isolated events. They followed a trajectory that anyone paying close attention should have seen developing. Penn had never stopped being that kid who jumped off his bike to start fights with strangers. That impulse had been channeled into a legitimate career for nearly 2 decades. But once the career ended, the outlet disappeared. The underlying tendency remained exactly the same. Penn was inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame in 2015. It was recognition of what he had accomplished during his prime. But by then, the prime was long gone. The brain damage from nearly 2 decades of professional fighting can't be ignored. Penn's MMA career stretched over 18 years, with 30 fights against some of the sport's most dangerous opponents. Frankie Edgar, Nick Diaz, Georges St-Pierre. Those battles left physical and mental scars that will never heal. But the argument that fighting alone caused Penn's current situation ignores all the evidence. He was getting into street fights before he ever stepped into a cage. He was causing problems at Nova União while representing them at World Championships. The instability was always present. In 2020, Penn announced he was running for governor of Hawaii. The campaign was unconventional and unsuccessful. He wasn't elected, but the fact that some supporters endorsed him based solely on his fighting career was troubling. The campaign failed, but what followed was far worse. Complete collapse. In 2025, BJ Penn's life fell apart entirely. Penn's first arrest of the year happened on May 25, 2025, following an incident involving his 79-year-old mother, Lorraine Shin. According to court documents and police reports, Penn allegedly attacked his mother by shining a flashlight directly into her eyes, grabbing her arms, and shoving her against a vehicle. The next day, he was arrested again for violating a stay-away order by entering his mother's home. Shortly after, he was arrested a 3rd time for failing to appear in court. According to Penn's mother, Lorraine Shin, he's suffering from Capgras delusional syndrome. In her request for a temporary restraining order, Shin said Penn has been using extreme psychological abuse toward me, claiming I'm not Lorraine Shin, that I killed his family and have taken over his mother's identity, and he wants me removed from his home. Basically what's happening is he believes his mother and his brothers are trying to steal his estate, his inheritance, and they're not really who they claim to be. Capgras syndrome is an extremely rare psychological disorder that causes people to falsely believe those closest to them are imposters pretending to be their family or friends. While there's no single known cause, brain injuries and neurodegenerative diseases are believed to be among the potential contributing factors, along with schizophrenia or other mental health conditions. This condition is extraordinarily rare. Most psychologists report seeing only a handful of cases across entire careers, spanning decades. Yet the symptoms Penn displayed matched the diagnosis perfectly: an unshakable belief that family members had been replaced, accusations of conspiracy and theft, escalating confrontations with the people he once loved most. The tragedy gets worse when you consider that his fighting career likely contributed to whatever neurological damage may be present. CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, remains poorly understood, but its connection to repetitive head trauma is well documented. Penn absorbed punishment from some of the hardest hitters in MMA history over an 18-year career. The cumulative effect of those impacts can't be dismissed. Penn has posted multiple disturbing claims on social media, alleging that his family members have been murdered and replaced by imposters. In one video, he argues with a woman who appears to be his mother, screaming that she's not his real mother. On episode 239 of the Joe Rogan Experience, Joe Rogan discussed Penn's situation. BJ Penn claims that his family are imposters, that someone has kidnapped his family and replaced them. Penn was arrested for a fourth time on June 12, 2025, for violating the temporary restraining order by entering his mother's residence. He posted $3,000 bail and was released. In court proceedings, Penn made unrealistic demands before the Hilo family court, requesting that his arrest warrants be recalled, that the 100-yard restraining order be lifted, and that his mother provide him with housing. All three requests were denied. The man who once had generational wealth, a family compound, and a legacy as one of the greatest fighters in history, was now banned from his own home, unable to access his accounts, and apparently unable to recognize his own mother. On November 4, 2025, Penn was arrested for the sixth time that year after allegedly punching and kicking a 45-year-old man multiple times at a residence in Hilo. The victim needed medical treatment for his injury. Penn was charged with third-degree assault and released after posting $1,000 bail. Penn's mother, Lorraine Shin, stated, "I love my son. I'm here to protect and help him. We need to pray for him and do whatever is necessary for him, as he suffers from Capgras delusional syndrome." In her restraining order application, Shin included a plea for medical treatment or other sources of therapy, emphasizing that criminal proceedings alone aren't sufficient to address what may be a profound mental health crisis. This is the tragedy of BJ Penn. Not that fighting destroyed him, though it certainly contributed, not that he lacked talent. He had more than almost anyone who ever lived, but that at every single critical moment, when discipline and sound judgment were required, he chose the other path. BJ Penn was possibly the most talented fighter of his generation. He had wealth, opportunity, and gifts that should have made him the undisputed greatest of all time. Instead, he stands as a warning, proof that talent alone, without discipline, without sound decisions, without the right people around you, amounts to absolutely nothing. The list of what-ifs goes on forever. What if he had stayed at 55 pounds for his entire career? What if he had kept his partnership with the Marinovich family? What if he had surrounded himself with people who challenged him instead of people who praised him? What if the discipline that came so naturally in the gym had extended to his choices outside of it? We'll never know. What we know is what actually happened. A fighter with once-in-a-generation gifts, who wasted them through a lifetime of poor decisions, now apparently suffering from a condition that may have been caused, or at least made worse, by the very career that should have been his greatest glory. And now, at 46 years old, arrested 6 times in a single year, banned from his family home, believing his mother has been replaced by an imposter, BJ Penn is living with the consequences of a lifetime of choices. His mother still loves him. She said so publicly while filing for a restraining order to protect herself from him. She asked the court to require therapy, not punishment. She understands, perhaps better than anyone, that her son needs help more than he needs jail time. Whether that help will come, whether Penn will accept it if it does, remains completely uncertain. The fighter who never backed down from any challenge in the octagon may prove unwilling to face the greatest challenge of his life, admitting that something is seriously wrong. The Prodigy became a tragedy. Thanks for watching. Check out other videos on the screen.